Hi. In my first video, I spoke about how important inner relational connection is to the whole human race, and today it's time to start with more detailed information about relationships and our collective need for connection. That word is also commonly referred to by other terms such as bonding, attachment, and closeness. And this need for emotional and relational connection is one of the key parts of what I referred to in that first video as the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is a metaphor for us not seeing that when our individual need for connection is disrupted, that this is what causes many of the difficulties between us as individuals, as well as some of the bigger problems in society that we experience as a species. Connection is paramount and is vital to our lives as oxygen is for our body. Let me just say that again. Connection is paramount and is as vital to our lives as oxygen is for our body. And when we don't see that relational disconnection is a key part of tension, conflict, and disagreement, and don't directly address it, then repair and resolution may be only partially achieved at best. However, before I give more detail about this crucial experience for us all, let me start with a little important background on it. Around 1960, research in a small part of the world of psychology into the needs of infants for receiving care became a doorway subsequently to one of the profoundest psychological truths and realizations in the entire history of the human race. While this research demonstrated that infants thrived best in an environment where their emotional needs were consistently supplied, in an atmosphere of reliable, engaged, and responsive caregiving from their primary caregivers, the opposite was equally true when care was withheld. In other words, if they didn't get that quality of attention, not only did they not thrive, but in certain extreme circumstances, when all emotional caregiving was withheld for long periods of time, this could even result in death. However, it was not until recently, the 1990s, that in mainstream psychology, the research into what is called attachment expanded significantly and became an accepted mainstream theory in science that encompassed the whole age range of the human race. From this point, it became more universally accepted that being able to seek consistent emotional support and reassurance at times of stress and distress was actually vital to every single one of us. In fact, a biological requirement from cradle to grave. Infants, children, and yes, us adults alike. However, this need for emotional and relational connection with each other is not just confined to occasions of extreme stress, but can be said to be an ongoing presence and experience inside all of us that is part of every human interaction in society. Being connected to each other is like emotional and psychological oxygen for us all. And as a species, we're biologically wired to do so. It's like an invisible grid that connects us all, just waiting to be switched on or off more clearly by some interaction with another human being or the outside world. And that human being might be somebody a split second before you'd never met in your life. But when they bumped into you on the pavement, turned round and blamed you and didn't apologize, your inner connection grid just lit up in annoyance, a sense of unfairness, and a feeling of hurt, lack of appreciation and consideration. Because we are not independent beings, but interdependent beings. This means that we function best when we retain and enjoy a certain degree of independence, but can turn to a few significant others at times of stress and can be confident of seeking and receiving soothing, comfort, and reassurance if we need it and ask for it. However, as part of our need for connection, it's equally emotionally important for us to be someone else's back and support when they need us. It's like a coin. and both sides are equally important and closely related. Accessing comfort and reassurance for ourselves when we need it, and being sought out and being the provider and the means of solace for another when they need it. In relation to this, think about your own relationships and friendships for a moment and see if you recognize this operating. It's kind of implicit, isn't it? We all know it's there, and most of us turn to loved ones and friends for responsiveness when we encounter the stresses and challenges of life and need shelter and an accepting and caring response. And when we want comfort or reassurance, it's not a weak or needy thing to ask for, but something implicitly hot-wired into all our brains, men, women, and children alike, and part of a survival mechanism for us all. When we're confident of receiving that support and our expectation is met and we get it, then this actually encourages us to explore and be more adventurous, independent, and curious. Therefore, our independence operates best when we know someone has our back. Of course, we see this function typically taking place when a young infant begins exploring and venturing beyond their caregiver. We may see them looking back and checking and then returning back to base when they've satisfied their immediate curiosity, or there is a need for a top-up of the reassurance. Then perhaps they repeat the same thing again when the first adventure was found to be sufficiently satisfying, safe, and enjoyable. Of course, in focusing on connection, I'm not saying that the majority of us don't know about or recognize the importance to us all of the human experience of bonding and attachment and the need to feel loved. Clearly we do, most obviously in romantic relationships, in families, as parents, and with friends. No, my point is that in all our interactions and relationships, whether recognized by us as close or not, feeling relationally connected is primary for us all, and the inner monitoring of it is going on all the time, mainly at a semi or unconscious level, until it needs to alert us more specifically to catch our conscious attention. And so the elephant in the room is referring to us not recognizing that losing connection with any other person, we don't have to be close to them, accounts for a significant part of our reaction and response as human beings to each other, whether we're conscious of it or not. And situations where there are tension and conflict between human beings are a direct flag and marker of disruption to our emotional and relational connection. In order to be resolved, disconnection needs to be directly revealed and addressed in a way that allows acknowledgement and repair for those involved. However, it's not always easy for us to immediately recognize at the conscious intellectual level that we've lost connection with others or the outside world, or if we do feel it, reveal it and directly show it. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is that we've not as a society and species modeled and practiced encouraging ourselves to focus internally on this part of our inner experience, and therefore for it to be recognized by our conscious mind. We tend to give a lot more weight and focus to our rational and thought-based experience and making intellectual meaning of our moment-to-moment experience of life. Secondly, the nature of our attachment response and the need for connection with others is one that typically engenders feelings of considerable vulnerability in us all. It does so because it's so vital and important to us, and we depend upon connection with others in the outside world as a major contributor for feeling good, secure, and confident in our lives. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, when we feel that confidence and secure connection, it actually encourages us to increase the quota of independence in our lives. However, there is a natural semi-conscious and unconscious reaction in us all to hide that vulnerability directly and protect ourselves if we don't feel safe to show it. Part of this protection can be due to us feeling that showing vulnerability or wanting comfort and reassurance is a weak or needy thing to do, and that it's better to be independent and self-reliant. Or we fear that others will disapprove of our vulnerability and will be non-responsive or even dismiss or reject us if we show it. Any actual experiences that we've had of others responding like that will inevitably confirm our fear and contribute to avoiding trying it again in the future. So what many of us do is mask our vulnerability with some other response or behavior on the outside that conceals it or hints at it. So for example, someone feeling scared and alone underneath may on the outside show anger, come across as accusing, critical, or even dismissive. Or they might do the opposite of that and shut down, become silent, avoidant, non-disclosing. If they demonstrate one of those external behaviors, it's very difficult for the other person to see the vulnerability associated with it underneath. If society is going to become a safer place to express our more vulnerable emotional and relational needs, then we're going to need to do something proactive to make it safe to do so and encourage it. In my view, to achieve this, we're going to need to make relationships, amongst other things, a much greater part of mainstream education from an early age. This would allow it to naturally seep into and eventually become part of our general society and everything that we did. Then it would be far more likely that we would recognize it as being present and involved in situations of conflict and difference. And so we would have a much better chance of escaping or at least resolving any distress or conflict much sooner. And of course, this has far-reaching consequences beyond individual relationships, for example, in terms of relationships between groups and countries, where connection also applies, because the common denominator is that we're all human beings. So in summary, the key point is that if we don't feel sufficiently emotionally safe to show this vulnerability directly to another person, we tend to conceal and mask it underneath other often automatic behaviors, reactions, and responses on the outside. And as already has been mentioned, these include anger, attacking, accusing, blaming, defending, explaining, intellectualizing, stonewalling, shutting down, avoiding, to name several of a very long list. So to illustrate what disruption to our connection with others actually feels and looks like underneath, and how it's responsible for triggering these types of familiar reactions and responses, let's now look at what might seem a rather innocuous example from everyday life. On this occasion, to help focus and illustrate the connection part, I'm just going to look at it from the experience of one person. So in this example, you go to make a fresh pot of coffee, and you find that once again, your partner hasn't washed up after their last one. You've repeatedly asked them to do it, and to make it worse, you did so as recently as last night. How do you feel relationally and react? Well, while this may seem a mundane and perhaps a little trivial example, our attachment and bonding system is unlikely to see it like that. In fact, it's likely to see it as very significant and meaningful. So significant and meaningful that it's likely to trigger one of those reactions and responses that I just named in the face of repeating occurrences. The most likely emotion I'm going to initially feel and show to my partner is anger, or a version of it like frustration, annoyance, or impatience. And if I decide to say something to my partner, my response and behavior will probably come across as any one of blaming, accusing, attacking, criticizing, or complaining. However, underneath the reaction of annoyance and complaint, I'm likely to feel a very different quality if I'm able to become more directly aware of my experience of connection with my partner. If I can feel it and hear it speak to me, it might be whispering inside me phrases like, I don't matter to you, I'm not important, and you don't appreciate my needs and care enough about me when I ask you to wash up after you. A part of me might notice that in terms of the closeness with my partner, I feel more separate from them and alone or lonely. This is my bonding and attachment system, my connection system, talking to me. However, as we see, it is submerged initially out of sight, both to myself and the other person, and camouflaged by my angry protest. These reactive behaviors are, in essence, a protest and a response against the loss of connection, and they're typically automatic and second nature. In other words, we don't have to think about it. Unfortunately, these automatic protective responses often not only make it very difficult for us to get what we really need emotionally and relationally, but make it very difficult for another person to give it to us. We get lost in these immediate, more reactive responses, which tend to steer us away and separate us from recognizing and asking for our more vulnerable emotional and relational needs underneath to be responded to and met. However, that doesn't mean it's not possible to locate these more vulnerable feelings and needs. It absolutely is, and we'll look into that in future videos. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed that and found that informative and useful in some way, and we'll continue with later videos. Please hit the subscribe button so that you'll be made aware as soon as a new video comes out, and do let others know about this series. Thank you, and see you again next time.